Hey guys, Noahsferatu here. I know it's been a while, but I've been spending the past couple of weeks playing a lot of Elden Ring, and I recently finished the game, um, and I have thoughts on it. Um, so this is a game I've wanted to incorporate in my channel for a while now. At some point, I might want to do an abridged playthrough of it because I do think it's one of the best games of all time. But it's a big game, and I feel like doing big games currently would not be the best choice for me because it'd be like a very ambitious undertaking to do a series on Elden Ring. But what I can do is uh, make a review of it. And this will be my first ever video game review on this channel. I might do more in the future, but I just had this idea and I thought it would, you know, make a nice, quick video. And I hope this influences um, anyone's decision as to whether or not they'd be interested in the game. Um, I'm not necessarily trying to turn people on or off the game. I'm just giving my honest thoughts on it and how I feel about the game. So let's start with the game's two biggest strengths, and those would be the gameplay and the art direction. Um, those are the things that the game excels at above everything else, in my opinion. Um, and I guess I would include, the music is kind of part of the art direction as well. The music can be pretty awesome at times too. But let's start with the gameplay. So one thing that makes this game really fun is obviously the fact that it gives you a big open world to explore filled with lots and lots of detail. Um, I guess what I mean by that is, you know, there aren't a whole lot of like open world games that fill me with as much excitement as this one because you never know what you're going to find in the next like 50 paces when you're exploring because there's so many different things you'll find, so many different surprising things you don't expect as you explore this game. And it manages to keep things interesting despite how enormous the game's world is. Um, you might go into a cave and, find a new creature you've never seen before. There's a couple of caves I've gone into where I'm like, wow, I've never seen a cave like this before in the whole game, multiple times. That's not to say there aren't some repeat, assets and bosses and monsters. I'm not saying that because it is a huge game. It would be pretty. There's no way it could be so big if, you know, every boss was unique. This game would have taken so much more time to make if that were the case. But I personally almost never got bored exploring this game's world because it's just really exciting. There's so much variety in it, um, and it is just so much more massive than you would ever expect when you first start it up. And another thing I think it does really well is I mentioned the art direction earlier. just the views and vistas in the game are like jaw-droppingly beautiful. And you'll see like a castle in the distance, and man, I'm really excited to explore that place. And guess what? You eventually will be able to. And the game manages to continuously fill you um, with that excitement throughout, the entire runtime, which for me was like I played through it really thoroughly, so I spent like well over 100 hours on it. Probably like 120-ish hours, honestly. Um, and I know I didn't find everything and do everything, but I feel like I explored this world pretty thoroughly. Um, so yeah. Um, Another thing about this, game being open world, and compared to other Souls games, I have played Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne and Sekiro, if you want to count that. Um, this game in particular does not like make you feel trapped ever. I've hardly ever felt like trapped in it, and um, so in some of the other Souls games, you'll come up to a boss and you have to beat the boss, and sometimes it'll be like banging your head against a brick wall trying to get past it. And this game never really made me feel like that because the world is so big, there's always more things to do. So if you get frustrated with a boss, or you're about to get frustrated with a boss, you can just do something else. There's probably loads of easier things you can be doing, and you'll probably find plenty of tools that'll help you make the boss you were struggling with a lot easier. So another thing I like about the game is it doesn't make you feel trapped, but it doesn't hold your hand either, which I like for the most part. Um, I feel like towards the beginning of the game, it's a little vague uh, about what you're supposed to be doing, and I feel like it might turn some new players off because maybe they think they're supposed to go to Stormvale right away because the game kind of nudges you that way, but then they get uh, constantly beaten up by Margit, and then they just quit, which I've heard is the experience of a lot of new players of this game. And it's one of the criticisms I have of the game. I kind of wish it nudged you somewhere other than Stormvale Castle, or at least hinted that maybe you should explore a bit and, strengthen up your character before going there. And then I feel like it would maybe be a bit more intuitive for new players. But yeah, that's how I feel about that. Um, okay. So I mentioned the art direction. All the mobs and bosses look incredible. Um, Especially the bosses. I love the boss designs in this game. Every single boss is beautiful to look at. And um, even the bosses that I didn't necessarily enjoy fighting as much, I still can't say they didn't look awesome. So, that's another reason why this game's art direction is fantastic. The combat is really fun as well. I haven't really talked about the combat much. There's a lot of depth to it, and it might seem a little overwhelming at first, but I think once you get used to it, it does become more intuitive. And there's so many different play styles you can have with this game. You can do an intelligent spellcaster build. You can do more of a quick ninja samurai dexterity build. You can do a strength build where you just bonk things, which is not very fun for me, but it's an option for you. Um, and there's loads of different weapons and toys you can play with in the game to help you conquer enemies and challenges. Um, yeah. Now, I think I should probably get into some of the other criticisms I have with the game. Um, I think one of my criticisms would be with the story, kind of. Um, so From Software, they're really good at writing lore for games, and George R. R. Martin of Game of Thrones fame was involved in I believe, in the lore of this game as well. Though I'm not entirely sure how much involvement he had. Um, but I have not really looked into the lore as much to really like judge it and how well written it is. Um, but the point I want to get to is that the story in Elden Ring, as it is with a lot of the games in this genre, it's kind of just there to complement the gameplay. And it's not the reason you're going to be playing Elden Ring. So if you're looking for the best story of all time, an RPG with a great story, look elsewhere. Like play Mass Effect or tons of other RPG games are way more story depth, in-depth story. I can't talk. Play like Baldur's Gate 3. Play more story-oriented games because this is not that. Anyway, um, so another criticism I have, the quest lines, the NPC quest lines in this game can be really hard to follow sometimes. And that's mostly because the NPCs bounce all over the map all the time. So it's so easy to miss NPCs and never even find some NPCs. I wouldn't be surprised if there are NPCs that I don't even know about just because I never ran into them. And there's usually like not any indicator as to where they'll end up next unless you just run into them. So I almost wish this game had some sort of quest log or journal in it just to remind you where you are at in some of the quest lines. That's not to say I want there to be like quest markers and, you know, I feel like we can add a quest log without it being too intrusive or too um what's the word? What's the word? Obnoxious. I feel like if you just have like a little, a fancy little quest log that just kind of that you either maybe you can write notes in or the game writes notes in without giving you quest markers, um, that would be fine. And I guess sometimes the game actually does give you some quest markers, like it'll mark things on your map from time to time, but still, sometimes the quest lines are pretty cryptic and really hard to understand without a wiki. So that's a big criticism I have with the game. Probably the biggest criticism I have with the game and Souls games in general. But on the other hand, if you miss out on some quest lines, it's not going to ruin your experience of this game. So don't worry about that too much. You might just miss out on a couple weapons or armor sets, and there's like a couple quest lines that'll lead to different endings, but again, it's not a huge deal. Um, Speaking of endings, I thought the final boss and ending was a little underwhelming. Um, and the whole ending sequence was a little on the underwhelming side to me. And this honestly was not the biggest surprise to me when I got to the end, because I've played Dark Souls and I'm familiar with some of the other Souls games, and I understand that From Software are not necessarily known for making the most fantastical, amazing endings of all time. And sometimes it kind of feels like they don't really know how to end a game. That's kind of how it's always felt like to me. Um, I will say, like, Sekiro is kind of an exception to that, because I think Sekiro at least has an amazing final boss and a pretty cool ending and a good story as well. So I shouldn't say they don't know how to make a good ending. It just doesn't seem like they do it very often. um, yeah. So I'm gonna get kind of into spoilery territory here. It probably won't ruin the game for you, but if you want no spoilers at all, you might want to skip this next bit. Um, so I liked the Radagon fight. I thought the cutscene where Queen Marika turns into Radagon, and the Elden Ring, appears inside of him, and it's a super hype moment, and like the menu music starts playing. That's a really cool cutscene and a decent boss fight. But then the Elden Beast shows up, and again, it's like a beautiful boss with beautiful music during the fight, but it's just not that special, and it's kind of annoying. It just runs away most of the time and casts these really annoying AoE spells, and it's just not very fun to fight. And when I got to the boss, I was getting annoyed, and I was like, okay, you know what? I just want to kill you so I can finish this game finally. And finished it, I did, and I ended up getting Ronnie's ending, which, from what I've heard, is kind of a fan favorite ending. It's probably one of the better endings, more fulfilling endings in the game, but it's still pretty cryptic and a little underwhelming for what is a 120-hour experience if you try to get the most out of the game. But what can you do? The ending is the end. But criticisms aside, like I said at the very beginning, this is one of my favorite games of all time, just because the adventure you go on, the exploration of the world, and the combat, the art direction is unlike anything I've ever seen before in an open world game, or probably any RPG game ever, and I guess with the exception of some of the other Dark Souls games, they can have really good art direction as well. But they aren't open worlds. And the fact that they managed to, stick to their Souls-like formula and incorporate that in an open world game so well is incredibly impressive. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much all I have to say about the game. I do recommend the game for anyone who's a fan of RPG games, action RPGs. If you like the feeling of exploring dungeons and fantastical worlds finding loot, treasure, leveling up your character, um, summoning familiars to help you get through tough challenges. Um, this is probably the game for you. But if you're looking for a game that's a little more on the light side, a little more story oriented, then Elden Ring probably won't be for you. But I love this game, and I plan on playing through the DLC at some point. I just started it, and I'm really excited for that. So I'm not going to review that, obviously, since I've barely played any of it. So look elsewhere for a Elden Ring DLC review, but I just wanted to review the base game. Anyway, you guys take care. I hope you enjoyed this Elden Ring review, and I'll see you next time.